Welcome back, everybody, to Goody and Johnny Mo with the movies. Tonight is going to be episode 37, and we are going to start our little horror movie run for the month of October in late September. We are starting it off with James Wan's 2013, I believe, The Conjuring. So this is a film that I've seen multiple times. I love this film. Spoiler alert, really enjoy this movie. But this was John's first viewing of it that he got to see last weekend, and so we are going to bring you that review right now.
Okay, but first we're going to have to go through our beer scenario here. You go first.
Well, since we're drinking the same exact thing,
Oh yeah, we are drinking the same thing.
I'm going to let you
forgot
talk about it.
Okay, so what we are drinking is a Omegang brewery from Cooperstown. They're three philosophers in their nice big bottle. And for those of you that don't know what that is, they describe it as a blend of quadruple ale and Belgian Creek ale with cherries. And it's very tasty. I've actually been to the Omegang brewery in Cooperstown, and the very first time I ever had Three Philosophers was on tap there, oddly enough. And I fell
Oh,
in
and I
love.
bet you it was damn good there.
I fell in love with it immediately.
All right.
But yeah,
So cheers to you.
Cheers.
Cheers to all the viewers and listeners out there. Thanks a lot, guys, for tuning in and continuing to support us. We enjoy doing this. We want to keep doing it and hopefully keep you guys entertained.
yeah. So what me and Chris like to do when we started this, I don't know, maybe a couple, at least a year ago, if not two, we like to well, I think Chris has been doing this for a while. Chris likes to watch a lot of horror
Oh, in
movies in
October.
October,
Yeah.
and he kind of pulled me into it. So we actually watch a lot of older movies, and we alternate. Basically, Chris picks a movie, then I pick a movie, then Chris picks a movie, then I pick a movie. And ultimately, what we're trying to do is not necessarily watch movies that we've both seen a gazillion times,
Right.
we've definitely watched Halloween, the original, and that was fun.
Like, to me, like, that's like something special. Like, that's a
Right.
staple that you're going to watch.
But there's always, I mean, there's tons and tons and tons of horror films going back decades and, so many. So Chris will try and, and oftentimes, Chris will try and like pick a film that he really likes that he knows I haven't seen.
Yep.
And vice versa for me. Because like we both are actually pretty avid fans of the horror genre. I think Chris's tastes run a little bit more modern.
Yeah, I would say that. I mean, with the exception of, I mean, probably for me, it's like, mid 70s to current.
Yeah, whereas basically I'll go all the way back to the the 1920s if I have to. Big fan of horror films from the 30s. Big fan of the 1920s and 30s German horror films. Big fan of the 1930s and 40s U.S. Universal Pictures horror films. Big fan of a lot of 60s horror films. A lot of really good black and white movies, and that's one of the movies that the next movie we're going to be watching is going to be one of my picks. It's going to be a black and white horror classic from the 60s. And hopefully we'll do a retro review of that. But again, these are going to be, for the most part, I think, retro reviews.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Because,
nothing's out.
Nothing's out.
Can't see anything,
It's crazy.
We have to make our own movies right now.
We live in a COVID-19 world, so we're doing the best that we can. And we still got our eyes on, episode 50, and then after that, episode 100, and
That's
so on
right.
and so forth.
So, this film, I did not get to see this movie in theaters, and I'm actually, after watching it, I'm upset that I didn't see this in theaters because this movie I thought was really well done. James Wan, he has done a few films in the past, and some of them are slipping my mind right now. But he's not just known, I don't think, for horror, but this was I think one of his big movies that kind of like got him on the map.
Yeah, and I've heard the name before, but again, I would be hard pressed to tell you what his filmography is.
And this basically, this opened up the whole Conjuring franchise. So after this, you had the Conjuring 2, you had The Nun, you had
Annabelle.
the Annabelle films. There's now 3 Annabelle movies, and then La Llorona,
The Curse of La Llorona.
The Curse of La Llorona. Yeah.
Now, oddly enough, I'll be honest with you, I don't think I've seen any of those films. And actually probably is a good thing, because I don't even know that I knew that the Annabelle films were related to The Conjuring. And I think maybe once I did hear about it, I just stayed away from it because I'm like, you know what, if I'm going to watch these, I pretty much got to watch these from the beginning. And the fact that they've made so many movies, that's not a guarantee that it's a good series. because there are a lot of
it's a guarantee that it's making money. Doesn't mean it's a guarantee that it's a
there are a lot of
exactly a good
there are a
series.
lot of movies out there that they made sequel after sequel after sequel,
Yeah.
and at the end of the day, they all suck.
And, and I'll admit, the whole Conjuring universe, there are, out of all the films, there's only a few that are really worth rewatching. To me, both the two Conjuring films I absolutely love. I would say the third Annabelle, maybe Annabelle 2. The first Annabelle is not that good. Second one's not bad. I like the third one.
Really? Okay.
I have not seen The Nun yet or The Curse of La Llorona, so I want to go back and watch those. And there's the third Conjuring film, which is supposed to come out.
Yeah, I was gonna say I thought there was
think
a
next year.
Conjuring 3.
There
but
is.
I guess that's coming
There's
out.
a third one's coming out.
Okay.
But one of the cool things about this film is this, for people that don't know, and again, we're going into spoiler territory. The film revolves around Ed and Lorraine Warren, who are these real life. These are real people. These are based on real events.
Right.
And these are two people that lived up in Connecticut and were basically spiritual or paranormal investigators, if you will, for the lack of a better term. Lorraine, I think, was more of was like a clairvoyant, and Ed was he was sanctioned. He wasn't a priest, but he was sanctioned by the Catholic Church to investigate matters like this scientifically. And I actually met these two people my freshman year of college, and I went to school up in Connecticut.
They're based in New England.
And they're based in Connecticut. They live from there, and then my school I went to was in Connecticut. And I got to meet them my freshman year, and it was in October. It was a really cool presentation, how they come in, and it's very similar to what these guys do in this movie, which I found interesting.
Well, how old were they
At that time?
when you met them? Were they like
I mean, if you're talking
in their
1999,
60s,
so
in their 80s? Were they 100?
I mean, they probably had to have been, I would say, in their mid to late 60s, maybe early 70s when they did that.
Okay.
I mean, Ed passed away a few years back, and then I think Lorraine just passed away last year.
Okay.
Or she might even still be alive. I haven't looked that. I haven't looked that up.
But I think that lends to I think that adds to the film the fact that these are not completely, well, at least the first Conjuring is not a completely fictitious story.
Right.
It has its roots in real people and real events.
Yes.
I would say, kind of like the Amityville horror, which they actually do reference.
Yes, there is a
movie.
reference to this at the very end of the film, and Ed and Lorraine, when I met them, they did talk about that. They talked about the Annabelle doll and how films like Child's Play, the doll Chucky, took some inspiration from their tales, from the actual Annabelle doll.
Now,
and there is so this museum that you see in their house,
Yeah.
this does exist. They talk about this and how motorists would come, and it was almost like a tourist attraction for people that were into like the spiritual or paranormal. They would come into this museum that they had in their house, and they would roam it and they would look at it.
Now, what if they charged admission for that?
I don't know if it's that they charge or it was like they asked for like donations.
Okay.
I'm not really sure. But to me, it was there was very interesting tales. The footage that they brought with them and that they played were absolutely incredible. They had both audio and visual data that they had from some of their explorations around the globe. I mean, these people weren't just based out of the U.S. They went across the globe, and you see that obviously in the second film when they go to England. But to me, this was such a really cool experience to see something from a young, when they were younger, and like kind of like up and coming people.
And it's kind of funny because I think in people in that sort of scenario, I think they're either 100% authentic or 100% fraudulent.
Yeah.
I mean, I think like psychics, you either really are psychic,
or you're just full of it.
You're not, and you're full of shit, and you know it, and you're just charging people, and you're good at reading people and that. But maybe they're real. I think there really is like a very small subset of real people that maybe do have psychic abilities, but it's very rare and uncommon. It's certainly not as common as the psychic billboards you see set up.
Especially going into the New York City, and every corner has someone that's clairvoyant. I don't think that.
So I think if you had 100 different people that do what are the names again?
Ed and Lorraine.
What's the last name?
Warren.
I kept
the Warrens.
short.
Yeah. No, it's okay.
If you had 100 different people that do the same exact thing what the Warrens do, And I think if you lined them up and they all gave their presentation, you're going to see which ones are full of shit and
Yeah.
which ones like actually seem to be like, wow,
They have some
they're the
gift.
real deal.
Yeah.
And it is, and it's, it does kind of question your, reality, if these people are really real and they can tap into like, psychic phenomenon, kind of, a little bit, I think it goes against, science a little bit. It's not quite religion, but it's not quite science.
But maybe it's just science that we can't explain.
Right, exactly. It's somewhere in between.
Yeah. And I loved the setting. Just this took place in the early 70s,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And
I think 71.
and I think the main house that this is based out of that they're going to is in Rhode Island,
Okay, yeah.
right? I think that's
think so.
and I'm a big fan of old houses. I own an old house. So to like see something like this in the film, like I'm constantly looking at like the structure of the home and like the woodwork, and it lent to an authenticity of that time period. To me anyway, like as I'm like watching this, like I grew to like appreciate the house
Yeah.
and what was taking place inside of it, and this poor family that it's just, it's a new family that moves into this home. It's this husband and wife and 4 daughters or 5.
You know what? It's kind of odd because whatever number of daughters were in the film, it didn't seem to match up with the number of daughters that were in like the actual pictures of the real family that was involved. I feel like they either subtracted a character
I think it was the same.
or added a character.
Oh no, I'm pretty sure it's the same.
It's the same?
Yeah.
Okay. But before we get to that, I just want to talk a little bit about the house because I think it really is important to take into account the time period that the film took place. Because taking place in 1971, that's basically 50 years earlier than today.
Right. If you think about.
So you're talking about,
Yeah.
So if a house that was old in 1971, could go back to, easily the early 20th century, and some houses easily could go, late 19th century.
Mid to late 19th
So you got to realize that, things that happened 50 to 70 years earlier from then, is a much more less modernized and civilized time than what we're used to.
Oh, absolutely.
I think if you go back to late 1800s, early 1900s, and stuff like that. And God forbid you go back to 1700s. I think people did a lot of scary stuff. I think people were less educated, I guess maybe, or less. There was less known about the world. There was a lot more superstition. I think people did a lot more like sick stuff,
more
like
ritualistic.
Ritualistic type
Yeah.
stuff. I mean, you still have that, kind of wacky stuff going on today, but the way things were 100 years ago, 150 years ago, 200 years ago, very different from the way things are today.
And you have to take that into consideration.
Yeah.
When watching something like this, because obviously the events, what's happening is currently, but there are things that happened in the past,
Yeah.
which you have to take into account.
Yeah, and if you go into any one of these old houses that have been around for decades, if not even across centuries.
There's a history.
There's a history. Not every house has bad secrets.
Right.
Some if the Rockwells lived in their same house for the last 150 years, I'm sure it was all really wonderful. But there are some houses that really could have had some bad stuff, whether it been murders or
Abuse.
rapes or abuse, all sorts of secret stuff that not for nothing. I think people certainly got away with more back then because
It wasn't spoken.
criminology and
Yeah.
DNA and science and it's just more bad stuff happened the further you go back in history. It's just the way it is. Certainly in American history, where 100 years ago, a lot of bad things could happen. So I actually find that interesting, and it makes that, appreciating that makes it more interesting due to the fact that it took place in 1971 as opposed to today.
Right.
When they talk about something that happened 50 years ago, they're talking about something that happened in the 20s, maybe. If it took place today, oh my God, something happened 50 years ago. Like, oh, what? Something happened when they, the family came home from going to see Star Wars.
Yeah.
It's not, it's not the same thing. It's a different time period. So it's always good to be cognizant of the movie that you're watching, where it takes place. You have to think about in terms of, when it took place and what they're referencing back to even further, because not everything is like it is today.
And some of that stuff you can see is nitpicking, but I think the really good directors take all that into consideration when crafting their story. And I think it just adds more layers of credibility to what you're watching on screen, and it really gets you to buy in.
Oh yeah, and plus trying to make all the scenery like time period specific too.
Make it authentic to that time frame. Yeah.
People aren't walking around with cell phones.
No, but I mean, just like the cars.
People are having, like rotary phones that
Right.
with that ring, things like that.
Just like the cars, the clothing, the interior like decoration and design of the house.
Yeah.
It just all rang true to that time period, and it was just really well done. I thought James Wan did a fantastic job with the design and his idea of what this house should look like. And I thought that was really, really well done.
Yeah.
The one thing I really appreciate about what James Wan does in this film, he doesn't go for the cheap jump scare.
Oh my God, I'm so glad. I'm so glad you brought that up. 'Cause I was going to bring that up.
Do you agree with me, or you disagree with me?
100% agree.
So the one thing I really enjoy in this film is that everything is built up and has a purpose. And to me, there are really no cheap scares in this, which unfortunately a lot of like modern horror films, they go for that. They go for that cheap thrill.
Yeah.
But I don't think what James Wan does, I don't think he does that at all in this film. I think everything feels very organic, and it's happening as we're all experiencing this together. We're experiencing this with the characters. And I just thought it was just so well done.
And not for nothing, that whole like jump scare thing, I'm sorry, I think that's a product of the 80s and it just never looked back. Because like, even though the modern template for horror films is probably Halloween, Halloween does not really have jump scares.
No. But you see that more in like a lot of the Friday the 13th films, your Nightmare on Elm Street films.
And as the production values,
a lot of like the
go down,
slasher films, the slasher genre.
The artistry of the horror film goes down, and it's just like, people just take these easy escape routes. It's a lot easier to do a movie strung together by jump scares than to actually create a movie that is scary due to its content and nature and the style of filmmaking. Because, I mean, not for nothing, most of these, cheap horror films aren't being made by super creative people, and this is all they know how to do.
Right.
And ultimately it's a shame because I think it dumbed down the film-going audience, the people that, just got used to that. And, and not for nothing, when there's I think when they're testing these films, like, the jump scares get, it's called the jump scare because it gets people jump.
Yeah.
And it's like, but it's a cheap thrill.
Right.
It's not a deep penetrating scare. It's not something that is actually it's not something that you're actually gonna remember. Like nobody remembers the most scariest jump scare. People remember the really good horror movies that scared the hell out of them.
Right.
Like The Exorcist or Halloween, things like that. People remember that.
But there's something special about movies, especially like horror films that took place in the real world. Granted, this is all, there's creative licensing that's involved in these storytelling for sure. But the fact that that this is based on a true story and that this happened to a family.
Yeah.
I mean, that to me adds a whole nother layer of believability where you're like this crap like happened in some way, shape, or form.
Right.
This happens.
Right. Maybe
to these
not
people.
exactly the way they did it.
Right.
And I think I feel like sometimes you can take such creative liberties with these types of movies that even though they're based on real events, it's obvious that they completely over dramatize
right.
it.
And you could ruin it.
To make it a point that, like, you know what? It obviously didn't happen that way. They're just trying. They're fictionalizing a a real movie.
Right. They're filling in these huge gaps in order to serve
Yeah.
the rest of the story, but doing it in a way that's so over the top,
Right.
it ruins the rest of the film.
Yeah.
And I don't think Juan does that.
And I think it takes away from the credibility. And right, exactly. In this case, I don't think it does because I I think I enjoyed this movie more because it obviously didn't have the silly cheap jump scares that you normally see in these types of films, but it was restrained in its
Yes.
in everything that it presented and in the shots. I think so. I think another thing that ruins a lot of these films is of recent, especially I think where it's ghost stories involved or specters or that. It's just so obviously CG.
Yeah.
Everything just looks like it doesn't look real. It's like pristine mint CG, and I think if something like that was actually really happening, in an unbelievable world where things like that happen, it wouldn't look that clean and polished. It would be smoky and dirty, and not all this intensely fluid and multifaceted and every single it wouldn't be that clear.
And there's so much in here
And that makes it look less real.
and then one of the my favorite scenes is when I think Lorraine's outside and she's hanging the laundry, right? She's clipping the laundry onto the clothesline, and then she gets this sensation over her, and there's a big gust of wind, and one of the sheets comes off, and it flies, and all of a sudden it hits like a figure. It actually stops and forms like a silhouette of a figure.
Yeah.
And then that disappears, and then it flies up to the upstairs window where the mother of the family is, and you just see her, and then Lorraine knows something bad's about to happen up in that room, and then she runs up there. That, it was just so well done.
Yeah.
And some of the camera angles. Do you remember the camera angle when someone's running through the hall, and the camera goes from the floor all the way over to the ceiling, and almost does a 180. And then they run back, and then it reverses the camera angle.
Yeah, I think I do remember that, and I remember being impressed by that too.
And I just like the way that Juan shot this, because the certain angles that he was shooting at almost made you feel like you were a part of the family watching what was going on in the house. Certain times, when they first discovered the basement and the family's kind of crowded together, looking down, the way they were shooting that, it was almost like you were crowded with them, looking down into the basement. And I don't know. I'm going to keep saying that it was so well done because it was, and it's what this has become one of my favorite horror supernatural films of the last 20-25 years. I really enjoy this. I thought the music was great. I'm sorry, I do forget the composer that did the film, but I thought the music was well done, and it was such a great accompaniment to what we were seeing on screen. I thought it flowed so well with the visuals.
Yeah, and it's sorry to say that I think the reason why I missed this movie is that because so many modern horror films of the last 10-20 years, there's a whole bunch of them patterned after the Blair Witch Project.
Yeah,
so
the
they
real
have,
found footage style.
Or things really amateur type style, like Paranormal Activity. And some of them are good and some of them are bad, but it's it's a certain style of horror film. It's like a low budget style of horror film that can be very effective, but after a while it runs its life. And then the other and usually these are no name casts and low budget films hoping to turn a monster profit, like the Blair Witch Project, which was actually one of the most profitable films in the history of film because it was made for almost nothing. And then on the other side, what you have is you have these larger type movies with more well-known people.
Right, these
bigger budgets, but they're usually garbage because they're totally run by studios that are just looking to make a profit and have really no interest in the artistry of making a good horror film. So and this movie is it's almost in the middle. It's it actually is, I think, a polished studio type film. It's not one of these low budget handheld no name person in the no name actors in the movie type movie, but it's not your standard color by numbers
Yep.
nonsense horror film that I'm so used to seeing. It's actually a real horror film.
Oh, it was refreshing.
Yeah, it's good.
It was such a refreshing take on the horror genre.
Right, and I think the other horror scenario you might get recently is basically the horror films that they were making. I think in Japan, like
Okay.
Ring.
Oh, like The Ring and
the other one, I forget the name.
oh god.
There's two of them are well known.
Well, they made a version of it here.
Yeah,
It was with Sam Michelle Gellar.
yeah,
I know which one
I
you're
know what you're
talking
talking
about.
about. I forget.
I know.
I know what you're talking about.
Yep.
But it's but like those films started a wave of horror film in Japan.
Yes.
That obviously Americans saw
We
that and
basically
said,
took
"Oh,
it.
we need to do
need
that."
to do our
And
version of
what
it.
they did is they basically copied some of the most well-known movies, and then also I think started either making some movies like that, and those are actually pretty good too because they're like I want to say they're studio made, but with low production values. They're not going for the over the top special effects.
Right.
They're going for they actually went for, actually like atmospheric, scary stuff. And I think the Ring and the other one, so annoying. I can't remember.
I
The
know,
Grudge.
The Grudge.
The
That's
Grudge.
it. Oh, good job.
The
Good
Grudge.
job.
And for anyone who's seen those movies, you probably only saw the American versions.
Yeah.
You got to find the Japanese versions. Because those are actually really good too, and in fact, probably even better.
Oh, I would think they would definitely be
They're
better.
probably better.
But I will say both the first Grudge and the first Ring were both decent films.
No, they were because these were the first ones made in the U.S. and they put their best foot forward.
Yeah.
And I think like in
They
any
made
one of these
sequels to
scenarios,
those.
oh yeah,
and
but
they were
not as good.
they were nowhere near as
It's like
good.
you just get that dilution factor where it's like this is the best thing this was great, and now we just got to copy. We already copied Japan.
Copy and paste.
Now we got to
Yes.
copy our versions, and at the end of the day, everything gets diluted. When you make a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy,
Yeah.
That last photocopy really looks like shit. It really does. And at the end of the day, if everything shouldn't always be a formula.
It doesn't have to be.
It doesn't have to be. There are enough creative. If you have creative people behind the reins of making films, 10 different creative people will make 10 different films. But if you have 10 guys who've been taught a formula, and that's all they're allowed to do, those 10 people are going to make the same exact film.
Yeah.
And it's not. And neither of those 10 identical films. None of them will be better than any of the individual 10 films that 10 creative people made. All 10 of those films, uniquely different, will be better than every single version of that carbon copy. And that's what filmmaking used to be back in the day, unfortunately. Filmmaking back in the day was so artist-driven, everybody had their own artistic stamp, and now because it's more product-driven, everything kind of looks the same. And
Well,
that's a shame.
it would lead me to believe then that Juan had a lot of creative control in this, and I'm hoping that,
because
that Warner
this
Brothers
movie
didn't interfere as much.
this movie has that feel of like somebody telling a story the way they want it.
Now, I'm not going to talk about the
Taking
rest
chances.
of the Conjuring universe and the other spin-offs that actually happened.
Yeah, because you can't ruin them for me.
I can't ruin it for you for one,
Actually wanna
because he
watch
hasn't seen
them.
it. I mean, those are big spoilers for John.
Yeah.
And the fact that Juan did not direct those. He only directed The Conjuring 2. All the other films, he
The
was...
first and second Conjuring.
Correct. He was just a producer or an executive producer on. I don't know if he has story credits with any of those, and how much of a hand he had in that. And those were all handed off to other directors. So I'm not sure
But
how much.
I would
how
think
much he
that
was
the
involved
fact that they introduced the Annabelle doll in this film,
Yeah.
whereas in this film it was really just a prop, I don't think it was the source.
I'm just wondering.
Or-
it was.
I mean, maybe later on in other films they come back and say, yeah, it's all from the Annabelle doll, but it almost feels like they set themselves up for a Conjuring universe. So
See, well, it was
sequels and so on.
I'm wondering if they didn't know how popular it was going to be, and when the film took off and did so well,
Yeah.
they were like, now let's make a movie about the doll. because that was in the beginning of the film.
Yeah. And that doll was from real
And that doll
real
exists.
world, real life,
Yeah.
real world
So
scenario.
there is a story of where that doll came
Yeah.
from, and I think they take they try to take the origins of that and bring it into those Annabelle films.
Now, oddly enough, I thought it was proven or spec, at some point that like the entire Amityville horror thing was a hoax.
I don't know if that's ever been proven. I think that's a theory by people, but I don't know if that's ever been disproven.
Because I know it was considered to be like, oh my god,
Like a big, I mean, there was
real
a
thing. But
big thing, yeah.
I thought that there was some sort of expose later on that everything was made up. Now, however, that would,
for what? For notoriety?
I don't know. Like to me, if it was made up, that would be the fault of the family, not the fault of people that were called in to investigate.
Right.
Because I keep wanting to say the Wheelers, but that's not their name.
Warrens.
The Warrens.
Well,
did the Warrens actually investigate the
They
Amityville?
did.
Okay,
They did.
and I'm sure they were
And
pulled in under good faith.
The beginning. Well, I don't want to ruin anything, but in the beginning of The Conjuring 2, there is a scene at the house in Amityville.
Oh, okay.
So I won't go into anything further, but there is that. I mean, listen, we both live on Long Island.
Yeah.
And the Amityville house is a big deal. However, nowadays the people that own it, it's changed.
Good
so
luck
much.
trying to find it.
They have complete. I mean, now the house in the movie
Has a distinctive look.
has a distinctive look, and that was the original look of the house.
Yeah, I'm sure.
However, the house has been refaced quite a few times, so that the house you can almost not even recognize it anymore.
Yeah.
And I think done so because of the film.
Now there was one scene in the movie where they leave the house and they go to like a little
Like a motel?
a little motel.
Yeah.
And that reminded me very much of the
Poltergeist?
scene at the end
Yeah.
of Poltergeist when they find
Me too.
when they leave the house. And you don't want to say, is that a
Did he take
is that a
inspiration from
copycat,
that?
or
Yeah.
was that an homage, or just
Or did that
a
really
little
happen?
borrow, or did it really happen that
Yeah.
way? Because at the end of the day, certain things just have, if you're going to tell the story the way it should be told, you can probably find a movie somewhere that kind of told the same thing. And at the end of the day, it's not necessarily stealing.
No, I don't think it was either. I would say if anything, it either really happened, or
Yeah.
he just took inspiration from that, saying, "Oh, this would be an interesting connection."
Right, but it
Or
definitely
like
did.
or like an
definitely did.
homage
Oh,
to-
and also
to
when
that.
they had all the paranormal investigators, setting up things in the house, it reminded me also of in Poltergeist when they
Yeah.
set up. They had the people come in and set up cameras and this and that.
Well, I just.
But again, like anybody, like doing that's what they would do. But you don't see that often in
But
film.
and that to me, like that was just such a cool way of using the technology at the time, and kind of like almost explaining like how they could record and document their findings and what happened as they were traveling,
Right.
and investigating all these
and-
these hauntings or paranormal activity.
Now today they would just tape everything forever and edit it out. But in '71 they had to they had to pick and choose because film was expensive and you didn't necessarily have ongoing video cameras, so they had these triggers that would
But
once
they were-
the trigger criteria was met,
Yeah.
the pictures would take
But that would happen under. I thought it was like a temperature
temperature
change.
triggers.
Temperature triggers.
Right. But they had ways of measuring that all the time, and
Yeah.
when something happened, it would flash a camera.
I found that very
I
interesting.
I found that very interesting too,
Yeah.
because today someone would just set up a
set up a
camcorder
digital-
and just let it
digital
run
camera
all
just
day,
go.
and they would rewatch the footage.
And just fast forward through it. And
Right,
get through it.
exactly, which is
But yeah, no, every time I watch this film, I tend to really, really enjoy it. Like this is one, like if this is on TV in October, this is when I sit down and I watch. I mean, there's a bunch of films that I'm sure all of us, if you're flipping through TV and you just happen to run by it, you're going to stop and you're going to sit down. You're going to watch the majority of that film.
Yeah.
For me, this is one of them, and I can't stress this enough at how good this film is, especially in the last 20, 25 years in the horror genre. That I highly recommend if you have not seen this yet to watch this film. I'm not saying you have to go and watch the entire Conjuring universe, but I'm sure at some point, at least watch this one.
Yeah.
And if you like it, start to explore the other films that are in the universe that make up the connected universe. And some of these films are loosely connected. The Annabelle ones are well, 1 and 2 are really loosely connected with the Warrens. The third film, the Warrens are in that for a little bit, so it's kind of nice to see them again. Because both the actors, I think, are fantastic.
Well, talking about the actors, so like I said, because sometimes so many of these movies they're either made up of completely teenagers,
Unknowns.
well,
Yeah.
either unknowns of any age,
Yeah.
or it's a complete movie made up of teenagers, which is nonsense. To
But
appeal
those are
to a
usually
young
the
crowd.
films that are typically like the jump scares. Like
Right.
that's where you're going with that.
Right. But instead, what you had is, even though I didn't know the names of the major actors and actresses involved, like the 4 adults, I did recognize them.
Yes.
I was like, they actually got some real people to do these parts. So the family that was being haunted, whatever. The father is the guy from Office Space. The mother is, I forget her name, but I've seen her in other films. I can't remember.
She's been in other scary films.
Yes,
before.
she's actually been in scary films.
Yeah, she was in The Haunting.
Yes, that's I remember
Yeah.
her from that and other
Or
things
The Haunting.
as well.
Yeah, she was in The Haunting. Yeah.
And the Wheelers, Sheerans, Warrens, never gonna get it. Never gonna get it. The Warrens, the husband, I definitely recognize. I just forget where I've
Wilson,
seen him
no,
before.
he's been in a bunch of
But
stuff.
the wife, who is really beautiful, she was George Clooney's girlfriend in Up in the Air.
Yeah.
Not the girl he's traveling around with. He works with, but the girl that he.
She's in The Departed.
meets.
She's
in a bunch of movies.
Yeah, she's in a bunch too, and
and,
they're
and,
both
and I like her.
like all 4 of them, like the 4 adult actors were all really, really good.
Yeah.
And then even
the kids were
even the young girls, because
Yeah.
all the young girls that are in this, they have this believability of when they get scared when something happens. Like at one point, this one girl's, a lot of stuff happens at night, right? Of course. So this one girl is basically on the bed. She's trying to sleep, and she thinks her sister is
sister's
pulling the
tugging her
sheets or
leg.
tugging on her leg. And then all of a sudden, she kind of is like a little bit aware of that there's no one there, and then she gets a huge tug and gets pulled down. And what I found amazing about this scene is as I'm watching this, I am remembering the Warrens' presentation, and they talked about that at the school,
Okay.
about something about this happening. And I remember that freaked me out. Like that night I had trouble sleeping because like that freaked me out when I heard that. And to see this on film, I was like, oh my God, they actually put that in the movie. And I thought that was really cool. But yeah, I thought the casting was really well done.
And I like the presentation of the family because a lot of times when you get into these movies where there's multiple siblings, it's like people get into these characterizations that they feel like like each sibling has to represent a different type of person. You'll have like the goth chick and the one who's
Right.
devoted to the family and the one who's a rebel. And it's
Yeah.
like, you know what?
They're all
You don't
different
always
characters.
get that. Sometimes, you just got 4 sisters that are all
And this,
they're all friendly and they're all,
And I thought, like,
most
it-
families are like that. Everybody
it's-
doesn't have these widely diverse characters in the family.
And it's funny, like I thought, like the girls themselves were all slightly different, but not enough to where they were like a particular character.
Yeah,
like they were
radically. They weren't radically
right.
different.
It's like
they all grew up in the same loving household,
they
and
were
they all
all
were good kids.
They were all slightly different, but you could tell they were all like good.
Yeah.
It was. I thought that was well done. And then of course they bring in the Catholic Church at one point too, and they were kind of slow to move on things. But I always find that interesting when you have these like spiritual, supernatural type films, and somehow the Catholic Church is involved with it.
Yeah, well, I don't think anything beats the way that was done with the Exorcist.
Exorcist, right?
Yeah, because that just made it like that would like make
That one we should do. We should probably do a
Yeah.
retro review of that. That would be good.
But I do have to say that I got to give my standard black and white versus color scenario.
Oh, I knew this was coming.
I honestly feel this film would have been much better in black and white, because black and white and horror like really go well with each other in terms of like texture and shading and shadows and stuff like that, but also because I don't feel that there was a real significant use of color in this film that warranted this decision where oh well, it's going to look so much better in color. I think this movie was just made in color because that's the default decision these days. But had this movie been made in decades past, it would have been a decision. Do we do color or black and white? And I can tell you right now, back in the day, they would have said, "Oh no, we're going to do this in black and white because it'll be so much better." Because I can tell you right now, I even told Chris, I said, this movie in color versus black and white would be a slightly different movie. But had they made this exact same film, it shot exactly the same way, in black and white instead of color, it could have easily gotten at least a quarter or a full half a star more than me because it would have looked that much better.
The only thing I'll disagree with is that I don't mind it in color. And one, I'm going to go back to the house. Like I thought having it in color, the house to me represents a big part of the story. And I think having it in color and seeing the different rooms, the coloring on the walls, the frames, the color of the furniture, the color of the wood floor, the staining of the floor. To me, all of that just represents the house. And if you just make it black and white and it's all about shadows and the black and white contrast and the gray, I don't know if you fully get to really appreciate that. However, I do understand how this film could have been shot in black and white and still been a very good film and very enjoyable for what they ended up doing.
Because I think the positives that they would have gotten from that, I think would have outweighed, I think, the negatives. But no, it was definitely an interesting film. I enjoyed it. I think I walked away with it giving it a pretty solid 3 stars, which is like, I'll be honest with you, for horror films, it's these days, for the last 30, 40 years since Halloween, so like 1980s and up, it's kind of hard to make a solid 3-star horror film, let alone a 3.5 or a 4. Not too many people have been able to do that. M. Night Shyamalan's Sixth Sense.
Oh, Sixth Sense is great.
That to me is a masterpiece. That is just really, really great film.
And anybody who says they knew he was dead beforehand, you're a liar.
Yeah, no, I didn't know.
You're a liar.
Yep. Yeah, no, they're just. It's a shame that I think the horror genre gets a bad rap because of
there was a long period of time where it was just poor.
The quality, the consistently and ginormous amount of output of predominantly poor quality.
It was quantity over quality for a long time. You're probably talking 2 decades.
Yeah, I mean, people just weren't making. People weren't considering people approach dramas and try to make a good drama. People that were making horror films were just looking for the cheap.
Well, do you know what I thought changed? You know what I thought changed that in the 90s? What horror film did you think of a horror film in the 90s that you thought might have changed that? That changed that formula?
Oh boy, I'd have to really think about it. Got me on the spot. But I think Sixth Sense was in the 90s.
Sixth Sense was in the 90s, and I
think that was in the late 90s.
That was 98.
I think 98 or 99.
Yeah, it was 98 or 99. You're right. Scream. The very first Scream film.
Oh, see, and to me, that created a whole different subset.
It did. Film. It created, but the film itself, when it came out, I thought that. I think the first Scream film is a really good horror film.
Yeah, I think it has its place. I think the problem is that it just created this formula. It created another formula and everybody beat to death endlessly.
Right. But to me that meant that it was very successful. Like if other companies that were out there that were production companies were taking that formula, like, let's do something like this, but different.
But Scream was almost a little bit like tongue in cheek.
It was, but I thought that's what made it work.
Yeah, it was a little. It floated the line between horror and comedy and even parody.
I think, and that's almost like what Scary Movie did, which was the spoof on all like horror films.
Yeah.
Which is almost enjoyable in and of itself. That first film.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's. You and I are going to watch Scream, and I think we should do a retro review of that at some point.
Oh, sure.
During the month of October, because I think that was. I think that's definitely worth watching.
Yeah.
But this is only the first one in our horror run. I think the next few films might be retro reviews of some horror films.
Yeah, I think so. As long as we keep making reviews of the films that we're watching, Because I got the next choice. I actually have a choice between one of two movies, and one of them is either going to be The Innocence, Innocents, not Innoncence. Because if you say both of those, they sound almost exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
But The Innocents from 1961, which is one of the best ghost movies of all time. It's an adaptation of The Turn of the Screw. It's a British film with Deborah Carr, and it's a classic. And then the other one is I think that's from 61.
Okay.
And I think the other one is from 1965, Roman Polanski's Repulsion, which is one of the all-time just great horror films. Some people had called it basically the European version of Psycho. Even though I think Hitchcock was British, but Polanski was Polish.
Okay.
But it was like, I think a lot of people considered Hitchcock, I think a lot of people considered his films like more like American based because a lot of them took place in America. They didn't take place in Europe, especially the later ones. But yeah, Roman Polanski's Repulsion is a deeply disturbing psychological film. Both of these films are in black and white, and thank God, because they would have been horrible, and both of them would have been horrible.
This is right in
color.
John's wheelhouse. See, this is what John does. John loves to he loves to bring me outside my comfort zone, because he knows my knowledge of film and where it is, dating back to like the mid '70s to current. So he always takes me outside of that because he wants to show me what came beforehand.
I got to expose him to some.
He does,
and these are both very
he does.
highly critically acclaimed films. Most people give Repulsion 4 stars. The Innocence floats usually between 3.5 and 4.
Okay.
But I think they're both 4-star films, but they're just both of them are in like my top 100 favorite films of all time. It's just fantastic. But we'll talk more about those when we get to them. Well, at the very least, one of those is going to be my next film. Well, Chris gets another pick, and then the other one is going to be the fourth film. So those are the two.
So I think, some of the things that I think we have to look forward to over the next month, those films that John just talked about, we're probably going to do The Conjuring 2, so I can catch John up on that at least.
Oh, okay.
I think we'll end up doing a comparison of Halloween 1978 and Halloween 2019. Was it 2019 or 2018? When was that? 2019, right? Was that last year?
I'm going to go with 2018.
2018. Right. Okay, that makes more sense because that would be what, 40 years?
You'd be believe it. Time flies. Yeah, because original Halloween came out in 78.
Yeah. So 40-year anniversary. So okay. So to me that makes sense.
Time flies when you're having fun.
So we'll do the comparison of those two films, along with a few others that I think will, if we can touch on some of the more original like 80s slashers that started off on first Nightmare on Elm Street or first Friday the 13th,
which is actually a very good movie.
Which is a very good movie.
Wow. So is First Nightmare on Elm Street. First Nightmare on Elm Street, First Friday, those are good movies. I think they might all go downhill from there.
I think we'll try and even come up maybe with something just to talk about some of our favorite like horror films, and maybe we can include that, not do like full on reviews.
We'll
do something fun with that to play for the month of October.
Top 10 favorite horror films.
Yeah, I think that might be a fun thing to do. But guys, I think we're done. Listen,
I think we're good.
Happy to hear that Johnny Mo liked the movie. I always take pleasure in picking a film out that Johnny Mo has not seen yet and that he actually enjoys.
Yeah.
Because it is very hard to please this man when it comes to watching film. So
I've been told I'm a snob. By more than one person.
And it's funny that Johnny Mo, after all these years, still believes that he's not one.
I'm not. I have
very high expectations.
I have high expectations. I have a very high standard bar.
His definition of a snob has yet to be defined, but right now he is a hard man to please, and I'm very happy when I pick something out that this man likes.
Yeah,
that gives me a little bit of pleasure.
And it's enjoyable for me too, because at the end of the day, you can't see every single film, and there's always going to be things that you've missed. Mm-hmm. And I've missed movies from every single decade, from every single year that film has come out. And I always try to go back and fill in those blanks. And to me, I didn't think this was a blank, but this was one of those films that probably I slipped by, never saw, and I think it's got enough acclaim and a following, and I filled in that gap, and I'm thankful for that.
Yeah. So I think with that, guys, we're going to end up signing off.
Yep.
We thank everybody for tuning in, whether it's watching or listening. we can't wait to do the next one.
Yep, and everybody look forward to October and a happy Halloween. And we're going to actually drink and cheers that we forgot to mention this. We actually have a little upgrade in our technology. We have a new microphone.
So if this sounds different to you than our other videos, it's because we actually have an external mic finally. I went out and grabbed one because I was like, I wanted to change up the audio a little bit to hopefully make it a little bit more clear, especially for those listeners that are on our podcast. So I'm really hoping that this comes through a lot better than some of our previous videos.
Yeah.
And I will keep trying to upgrade the technology to make this a little bit more of a legit channel and podcast to listen to and to watch. So thank you guys for all
And
tuning
I'm going to
in.
give a quick shout out to my buddy Alex Pict, who had told me months ago that we should get a microphone for our YouTube channel.
And there we go.
And we did.
Alex, I was glad to satisfy that need.
Yep.
All right. Thank you guys so much for watching, listening. Cheers.
Cheers.
See you next
Have
time
a good
with the
one,
movies.
guys.